Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to shift our mindset. It's time to rise above the noise and settle into the peace that can only come from one source, the Almighty. Today, we're going to talk about a profound truth that is too often overlooked in this fast-paced world. Resting your mind and trusting God because the future is in His hands. Let's dive into the heart of the message, Jeremiah 29. A chapter full of divine reassurance. The Israelites were in captivity, feeling helpless, overwhelmed by the present, uncertain about the future, and yet, in the midst of that, God speaks a word of peace, a promise of hope. Listen closely to what He says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." Jeremiah 29:11. Now, let's break this down with 6 keynotes that will empower you to rest your mind and trust God with your future life, is filled with twists, turns, and moments where we feel completely out of control. We strive, we hustle, and yet, there are times when things seem to spiral beyond our ability to manage. But here's a truth that we often forget. God is sovereign over everything. It's easy to say that we trust God when everything is going smoothly, but when life throws us into the storm, that's when true trust is tested. We all go through seasons of uncertainty, moments where we question, why is this happening? Why can't I catch a break? What is the purpose of all this suffering? It is in these times that we need to remember one thing. God is not just aware of our situation. He is in control of it. His sovereignty is not passive, it's active. When we truly understand that God is sovereign, we recognize that nothing happens by chance. Every detail of our lives, no matter how insignificant it may seem, is under His divine authority. The struggles we face, the heartbreaks, the challenges, they are not random. God is orchestrating every moment of our lives, even the ones we'd rather skip over. He sees the bigger picture, the full canvas of our lives, and He knows exactly what He's doing. Think about the story of Joseph in the Bible. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and imprisoned. It seemed like his life was spiraling downward, and if we were to look at it from a human perspective, it was a story of tragedy and hopelessness. But in the end, Joseph was elevated to a position of power, and he was able to save not only Egypt, but his entire family from famine. What seemed like a series of unfortunate events was actually a sovereign plan at work. God used every single part of Joseph's journey to position him for the purpose He had for him. Joseph himself, in the end, realized this. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Genesis 50:20. Joseph's story is a perfect reminder that even in the most difficult moments, God is working everything together for His greater purpose. When we apply this truth to our own lives, it means that the difficulties you face today are not without purpose. The frustration you feel, the waiting that seems endless, the doors that won't open, they're all part of a bigger plan. You may not see it now and you may not understand it, but the sovereignty of God ensures that your life is not a series of disconnected, random events. There is a plan. There is a purpose. There is direction, even when you can't see the path clearly. Trusting God's sovereignty means relinquishing our desire for control. It means letting go of the need to have every piece of the puzzle in place before we can have peace. It means acknowledging that we can't always understand the why behind everything, but we can trust the who holds everything in His hands. When we stop fighting for control and start resting in His sovereignty, we open ourselves to peace. Peace that surpasses understanding, peace that only comes when we acknowledge that God is the ultimate authority and that He's working all things together for our good, even when we can't see it. It's easy to believe in God's sovereignty when things are going well. But when we're faced with hardship, when we're walking through seasons of confusion and difficulty, that's when trust becomes a choice. Will we continue to trust that God's plan is unfolding, even when it doesn't look like what we expected? Will we surrender our need to control the outcome and allow God to work in His timing? The truth is that God is never surprised by our circumstances. He isn't scrambling to figure out what to do next. He's never caught off guard. The Bible reminds us that He works all things according to the counsel of His will, Ephesians 1:11. This should bring us great comfort. Even in moments where we feel like we're in a holding pattern or when we feel stuck, God's sovereignty assures us that He is still in control. The God who created the universe, who spoke everything into existence, is the same God who is in control of your life. Nothing happens outside of His will. So, when life gets overwhelming, when you feel like your world is falling apart, remind yourself of this truth. God is sovereign over your situation. Trust that He knows exactly what He's doing, even when you don't. Rest your mind in the fact that the future is not in your hands, it's in His. And because He is sovereign, you can trust that His plan for your life is good. You can trust that He is working all things together for your benefit and ultimately for His glory. Your story isn't random. Your life isn't a series of coincidences. It is all part of a divine purpose, and God, in His infinite wisdom, is orchestrating every step. So rest and trust in His sovereignty. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to control every outcome. Trust that He is in charge and that His plan for your life is greater than anything you could imagine, of course. Here's an expanded version of 2 keynotes from the speech, further developing the concepts of trust God's sovereignty over your situation and release the pressure of knowing the future. In this fast-paced world, we often forget that we don't have to have everything figured out. There is so much pressure to know where we're going, to have a clear plan, and to be certain about what comes next. But this need to control every detail of our lives is not only exhausting, it's also unnecessary. One of the greatest truths we can grasp is that the future does not rest on our shoulders, and we were never meant to carry that weight. When we release the pressure of having to know the future, we free ourselves to live in the present, fully trusting in God's divine plan for us. In Jeremiah 29:11, God reassures His people, saying, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." Notice that God doesn't say, "You know the plans," or "You have to figure it out on your own." Instead, He tells us that He has the plans, and they are good plans, full of hope, filled with promise. This is where we must learn to let go of the need to control our future. It's human nature to want certainty. We want to know what's coming, when it's coming, and how it will unfold. But when we lean too heavily on our ability to predict and control the future, we miss out on the peace that comes from trusting God with what lies ahead. It's not that we shouldn't plan, set goals, or work hard. Those are important and necessary steps in life. But the key is to plan with open hands, knowing that the ultimate outcome is in God's hands, not ours. There's a freedom that comes from knowing that we don't have to have everything mapped out. Our responsibility is to take one step at a time in obedience to God, trusting that He will guide us, even when we can't see the entire path. This is where the concept of releasing the pressure of knowing the future becomes essential. We often try to micromanage our lives and exhaust ourselves trying to predict every outcome, but God never promised us a life of certainty. Instead, He promised us His presence. He promised us peace. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." That rest is not a rest from doing or planning. It's a rest from the constant worry and anxiety of trying to control every detail. When we trust God, we trust that He has our future in His hands and that He will lead us in the right direction at the right time. It's easy to look at someone else's life and think they have it all together, that they know exactly what they're doing and have every step planned out. But the truth is, no one has a crystal ball. Life is full of unknowns, and that's where God's sovereignty becomes our greatest comfort. We don't need to know every twist and turn of our journey. What we need is to know that the one who holds the future is trustworthy. Trusting God means that we can rest in the knowledge that the future is already known to Him and that we are safe in His care. When we begin to trust God in this way, we release the anxiety that comes with uncertainty. We stop living in constant fear of what could go wrong and start living with the confidence that no matter what happens, God is with us. And His plans for us are far better than any plans we could make on our own. Even when we face challenges, detours, or moments of disappointment, we can trust that God is using those moments to refine us, teach us, and position us for something even greater. Another profound aspect of this journey of trusting God is understanding that His timing is perfect, even when it feels delayed. In Jeremiah 29:10, God speaks to the exiled Israelites and tells them that He will bring them back to their land after 70 years. 70 years, that's a long time to wait, especially when you feel displaced, forgotten, or abandoned. But here's the powerful truth. God's timing is never early or late. It is always perfect. We may want things to happen on our timeline, but God knows that His timing will bring the most growth, the greatest impact, and the best outcome for us. Our impatience often comes from a place of wanting things to be resolved quickly, but God's delays are not denials. They are divine opportunities for us to grow in trust and character. When we're in a season of waiting, it can be tempting to become disillusioned, to lose hope, and to feel that God has forgotten about us. But we need to remember that God does His best work in the waiting. If the Israelites had been freed immediately, they wouldn't have had the opportunity to grow, to rely on God, and to experience His faithfulness in new ways. God was teaching them to trust Him in the waiting, to rest in His promises, and to wait with expectation for the future He had promised. This is a critical lesson for us today. When we find ourselves in a season of waiting, whether it's waiting for a job, waiting for healing, waiting for a breakthrough, we need to resist the temptation to worry, to control, or to rush ahead. Instead, we need to trust God's timing. Waiting isn't a passive activity. It's a time of active faith where we trust that God is still working even when we can't see it. In fact, waiting on God is a declaration that we believe His timing is better than our own. And when that breakthrough finally comes, we'll be able to look back and see that God's delay was never a rejection. It was a perfect part of His plan. So, let go of the pressure to have everything figured out. Trust that God's plan for your future is not only good, but that it's unfolding in His perfect timing. You don't need to know all the answers or have a clear picture of what's next. All you need to do is trust Him. Take one step at a time and wait for His timing to unfold. The future is in His hands, and He will lead you exactly where you need to be. This expansion focuses on two critical aspects: releasing the pressure of knowing the future and trusting God's perfect timing. The message encourages surrender and peace, trusting that God is in control of every moment of our lives, certainly. Here's an expanded version of 3 keynotes from the speech, exploring deeper aspects of trusting God's sovereignty, releasing the pressure of knowing the future, and finding peace in His perfect timing. In a world that constantly demands answers and immediate results, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the pressures of life. Every day, we are bombarded with expectations to succeed, to have a clear direction, and to predict what the future holds. However, one of the most liberating truths we can embrace is that we don't have to know it all. God, in His infinite wisdom, has already mapped out the future for us, and it is not our job to figure it all out. Trusting God's sovereignty over your situation means acknowledging that He is the ultimate authority in your life, and His plan is perfect, even when we don't fully understand it. We often struggle with this truth because we are wired to want control. We make plans, set goals, and try to control every outcome, often believing that if we work hard enough, we can shape our own destiny. But this mindset overlooks a key reality. We don't have the power to control everything, and trying to do so only leads to frustration and burnout. Instead, God calls us to trust in His sovereignty, knowing that He sees the bigger picture and has the perfect plan for us. In Jeremiah 29:11, God reminds His people that He knows the plans He has for them, plans for a future and a hope. This isn't just a promise to the Israelites, it's a promise to us as well. God has already designed our future, and it's good. When we embrace this truth, we can let go of the anxiety and fear that come from trying to control the outcome of our lives. Instead of constantly worrying about what will happen, we can rest in the knowledge that our lives are in His hands. God's sovereignty means that nothing in our lives happens by accident. Every challenge, every season, every door that opens or closes is part of His plan. We may not always understand why things are happening, but we can trust that God is working everything together for our good. When we truly trust in God's sovereignty, we release the need to control our circumstances. We stop trying to figure out the future and start focusing on being faithful in the present. This shift in mindset is crucial because it frees us from the constant pressure to have all the answers. We can focus on doing our part, following His lead, and trusting that God is doing the heavy lifting behind the scenes. The future is not in our hands, it is in God's, and that is the ultimate source of peace. The pressure to know the future and to control our own destiny often leads to frustration. We are conditioned to think that we must have a clear roadmap for our lives, but this only results in unnecessary stress. Releasing the pressure of knowing the future is one of the most powerful steps we can take toward finding peace. We don't need to have all the answers right now. In fact, most of the time, the answers will come when we stop striving to figure everything out. The need to know what comes next often stems from fear. Fear of failure, fear of making the wrong decision, or fear of not living up to our potential. But when we trust that God already knows the way, we can let go of these fears. We are not in this alone. When God promises us that He has a plan for us, He is not just speaking in vague terms. He is telling us that we don't have to carry the weight of the future. Letting go of the pressure to control the future doesn't mean abandoning responsibility or neglecting to plan. It means releasing the anxiety of needing everything to fall into place according to our timeline. Instead of obsessing over every detail, we focus on the present, on what God is calling us to do right now. We step forward in faith, knowing that God will direct our paths. Trusting Him with the future means living in the freedom of knowing that we don't need to control every outcome. We do what we can in the moment, and we leave the rest in His hands. This shift in mindset allows us to experience peace, because when we stop obsessing over the future, we begin to live fully in the present, trusting that God is already at work in ways we can't see. Finally, understanding God's perfect timing is another key to living without the pressure of knowing the future. It's easy to become frustrated when things don't happen as quickly as we would like. Waiting is one of the hardest things to do, especially when we are unsure of what the outcome will be. But God's timing is always right, even when it feels delayed. God's delays are not denials. In fact, He often uses times of waiting to refine us, teach us patience, and prepare us for what's to come. When the Israelites were exiled in Babylon, they were instructed to settle in, build houses, and prosper in the land, even though they didn't know when they would be restored to their homeland. 70 years would pass before their freedom came. Can you imagine the questions they must have had during those long years? Why so long? Why this delay? But what they didn't know was that God was at work during that waiting period, shaping them and preparing them for what He had promised. Their restoration would be greater because of the lessons learned in the wait. In our own lives, the waiting seasons can be difficult to navigate, but God's timing is always perfect. We may not understand why things are delayed, but we can trust that He is using this time to prepare us for what He has in store. When we wait with faith, we grow in trust, knowing that the delay is not a sign of rejection but of divine preparation. The future is unfolding in God's perfect timing, and when the time is right, everything will fall into place. By trusting in God's sovereignty, releasing the pressure of knowing the future and understanding the perfection of His timing, we free ourselves from anxiety and frustration. We embrace the peace that comes from knowing that our lives are in the hands of a faithful God, and we trust that He is working all things together for our good. When we let go of the need to control everything and place our trust fully in Him, we find the peace, hope, and direction that our souls long for. Of course, here's an expanded version of 4 keynotes from the speech, weaving together the themes of trusting God's sovereignty, releasing the pressure of knowing the future, understanding His perfect timing, and recognizing the peace that comes from surrendering control. We live in a culture that prizes independence and self-reliance. From an early age, we're taught to map out our lives, set goals, and push toward success with everything we have. But what happens when our best-laid plans don't work out? What do we do when life takes an unexpected turn and all our strategies fail? This is where the truth of God's sovereignty becomes a foundation we can stand on. Trusting God's sovereignty means recognizing that He is in full control, no matter how chaotic things appear on the surface. His plans are not just good, they are perfect. And while we may struggle to see how everything fits together, we can have peace in knowing that He is weaving every thread of our lives into a masterpiece. This trust is not passive. It requires a daily, conscious decision to believe that God is guiding each step, even when we can't see where the path is leading. We might face setbacks, disappointments, and seasons of silence where it feels like nothing is happening. But trusting in God's sovereignty reminds us that even when it's quiet, God is working behind the scenes. He's opening doors we can't see, orchestrating circumstances we don't understand, and shaping us into who we're meant to be. The challenge is to keep believing, even when our emotions try to convince us otherwise. Faith in His sovereignty keeps us anchored when everything around us feels unstable. Along with trusting His control, we must release the pressure of needing to know the future. One of the heaviest burdens we place on ourselves is the constant need to figure out what's next. We plan endlessly, stress about decisions, and fear making the wrong moves. But Scripture makes it clear that we are not meant to carry that weight. Jeremiah 29:11 tells us that God knows the plans He has for us. It's not our job to know every detail of the journey. It's our job to trust the One who does. When we finally let go of the obsessive need to predict and control the future, we begin to experience true freedom. Life becomes less about striving and more about surrendering. This doesn't mean we sit back and do nothing. It means we move forward with open hands and a heart of trust. We make plans, but we hold them lightly, allowing God to redirect us as He sees fit. We take steps of faith without needing every answer up front. Releasing the pressure to know the future allows us to focus on today, to live fully in the moment, and to trust that God will reveal the next step at the right time. There's no greater peace than knowing that the God who created the universe is holding your tomorrow. Waiting is often the hardest part of the journey. We want answers now, breakthroughs now, clarity now. But understanding God's perfect timing is essential to our growth. The Israelites had to wait 70 long years for their restoration. That kind of waiting can feel unbearable, but it teaches us valuable lessons about trust and patience. God's timing is never off. It's always precise. When we feel like things are taking too long, it's not because God has forgotten us. It's because He is aligning everything perfectly. His delays are not His denials. They are divine pauses meant to prepare us for greater things. Waiting seasons stretch our faith. They force us to lean into God and develop a deeper dependence on Him. While we wait, God is strengthening our character, building endurance, and refining us. When the breakthrough finally comes, we are ready to handle the blessing because we've been prepared through the wait. Trusting His timing transforms waiting from a source of frustration into a period of fruitful preparation. Instead of asking, "Why is this taking so long?" we begin to ask, what are you teaching me during this time?